Hello and welcome. I am Exelite and this is my channel. And today I get the privilege of narrating one of our community's stories that they submitted for the 31 Days of Halloween. So I want to say thank you to Mark Pavlicek, who wrote this story and sent it in as he has done for the last several years. Before we get started, if you would please give this video a thumbs up. Give Mark some encouragement. And if you are not already, please subscribe to this channel and click that bell so you can be notified when my content goes live. And let's get started. The title of the story is Call Me Mom. Betty Ann Hendricks had recently become Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison, and it was no secret to anyone who knew her that there was a motive behind this recent development. Betty had fallen in love with Alex Jeremiah Harrison, not for his looks, not for his power or money, though these things had helped, but because of his children. Unable to have any children of her own due to a diagnosis of endometriosis as a flourishing teenager, she was aware that her best chance of doing what she truly loved, tending to a family, was met by Alex's prior wife falling ill and passing away at a young age, leaving 3 young and idyllic children in the wake. When she had learned of this misfortune, she knew that she had to be his next wife, so that she may raise and love a dear family all of her own. You see, Betty Ann had been the best friend of Alex's wife, Marion. She was a fixture in their home through each pregnancy, and she had a special and unique affinity to each child. She bonded with Carrie over late-night ice creams as the two of them had discussed the year's cutest boys, and as she warned Carrie about the intentions of men. She helped Carson in the backyard stream catching bullfrogs and taught him the meaning of Lithobates Catesbianus as they splashed around in the muddy water in bright blue galoshes. And to little Cassandra, she held her close and cooed to her softly in her favorite plush blanket when Marion was too tired from the day, whisking her off gently to sleep on many occasions. Yes, as Marion had grown close to Alex, so too had her bond with Betty Ann grown closer. So it seemed the natural choice, as Alex had needed help with the children, but also because he had grown so close to her through the years, that Betty Ann should become his next wife. Loneliness of a man is a powerful emotion, and one likely to cause dramatic reaction, and also one often not entirely thought out on his behalf. His marriage proposal had happened only a few months after the death of Marion, but circumstances as they were, no one ever challenged nor remarked in the negative as they found out that Alex and Betty Ann were soon to be married. Betty Ann had come from modest beginnings. She, Marion, and Alex had all grown up in Bend, Oregon. They had grown up in the 80s and the 90s. Back then, Bend wasn't nearly as big as it had become. The 3 of them had grown up in a cornucopia of science and nature. Any free time outside of class was bound to be spent in the woody hills, forests, and streams that Deschutes County had to offer. Although she had never experienced poverty in childhood, as an adult, she never felt as though she had any more money than was just enough. Although most young women dream of a large and bountiful wedding with every stop and punch pulled and every detail designed, Betty Ann was so focused on becoming a new wife that time became a luxury and one wearing thin. As such, she balked at an ornate and complicated wedding and instead fell back on prudence and humility in order to get where she was trying to go faster. And of course, Carson the ring bearer, gallant on this special occasion in a navy sports coat, looking regent with cufflinks and all. Little Cassandra slept in a sweet and white poofy thing that hid her magically, resting on the shoulder of Alex's mother as the organ music haunted the chapel steeple, merry and customary in one breath. It was a day none of them would forget, with Betty Ann's smile wide and loving, covering everything it touched. Betty Ann moved in promptly. She did so with great haste and ease, in only a weekend, keeping only what she needed. Most of the things that she did bring to her new home were necessities. She left everything inconsequential behind, taking great lengths not to disturb the family in this awkward but necessary time. Every last one of the family was taken smartly into account to ease herself in gradually in order to not disrupt the inner workings of an already well-oiled machine of routine and daily life. It was with special thought that she prepared on Monday a great feast indeed, welcoming officially herself into the home. She roasted a turkey with butter underneath the skin and rosemary freshly snipped from the front yard. She added a tiny bit of baking soda to brown the skin nicely, as crispy as she could get it. She made mashed potatoes whipped with a dollop of cream cheese, her secret ingredient. From the drippings, she made a silky brown gravy, her specialty, and swirled in a handful of sage leaves at the very end. And she went all out and made a round, two-tiered white chocolate ganache white cake with coconut along the sides. As the children gathered around for dinner and everyone folded their hands in their laps and bowed their heads, eyes closed for prayer, and when each had said a few words about thankfulness, Carrie broke the silence by asking, "Betty Ann, please pass me the gravy." With that same polished smile any of them would ever and always remember, perfectly white teeth showed through as she beamed down thoughtfully on her new family. With an inward sigh that could only convey the preciousness and fullness of this moment of being all together, Betty Ann said to them, "Please, children, from now on, call me Mom." As the old man Winter began to cough into the tree, so did the deciduous leaves swirl as they bent from bright orange and reds to crisp and brown former versions of themselves. The sweetest apples, the red Reubens, would sometimes hang from a single branch. In the crisp dew of Oregon Valley fog, you could almost break out a knife and carve one open straight away. The windy breath of early winter sucked out any of the wetness November had left behind and ushered in a new and distinct era. It was one of white-coated forests and cold, feather-filled jackets. It was one of frozen, mud-coated galoshes and wood axes. One of pine sap and peppermint candies. But any of the sterile, chilling breath of early December melted to pieces in the face of late December and the holidays. And the house of Betty Ann, Alex, and the three children, the icy roots of winter, never had a fair shot to take hold. They had never smelled the spicy warmth of Betty Ann's gingerbread or tasted a roasted goose as even a spray of mistletoe hung down, hidden, but found out. The family soon became a whole unit, unbound by the illness and departure of Marion. It wasn't before long that some of the memories of their mother became more vague with fuzziness. The middle child talked of her less often, and never with tears. The youngest was too little to remember much of her at all. And as she worked on this purposefully and with intricate and great care in the things she did and said, she beamed with explosive light on the inside as 1,000 diamond facets might do, if pierced with the light of the most brazen afternoon. Months passed by, and in the early hours of one sullen and irrevocable March morning, the rain came down, pelleting the home with a wintry mix of frozen rain and hail. The tumult woke up Carrie, and she tiptoed into the baby's room to check on her. The absence of any fussing seemed to her suspicious, and she reached and tried to turn the baby onto her back. Trying not to panic, she remembered something she had heard before and took out a small, compact mirror from her purse and held it up quickly but gently underneath the baby's nostrils. Nothing. And if the others in the house had still found silence to cling to and try and sleep off early spring's violent precipitation, they found it no more as Carrie unleashed the most vulgar, blood-streaked scream a 16-year-old had ever produced, at least in the state of Oregon. It took a great deal of time and hundreds of questions before anything had the semblance of normalcy. Betty Ann was just as shocked as anybody. She had lovingly prepared a bottle for the baby that night before, and then swallowed her right before she brought her into her crib to sleep for the night. Nothing strange or out of the ordinary had occurred. It was just an ordinary night. But the first called to the scene were detectives and investigators, causing quite a fuss indeed. They had interviewed every member of the family, including Betty. She was in a state of disbelief after the baby died. In her mind, she could still feel the fabric of her little white nightie, and she could see the vivid pale yellow of her booties. The baby hadn't fussed or otherwise shown any degree of discomfort. But the detectives had focused a lot of their questioning toward Betty, even though the rest of the family had made it out of questioning with little ado. "I can't prove anything, but I just don't trust her," Detective Lansing had said plainly. He chewed on a toothpick deliberately. "Let's look at the autopsy, and if there is absolutely anything that doesn't look completely normal, I'll have her in for a second round." Those were the final words on the subject because nothing irregular ever came up. There was absolutely no sign of choking or suffocation. There were no bruises or scratches anywhere on the body. Toxicology was negative for any substance, and the baby's lungs were free of fluid or debris. Despite his misgivings, Detective Lansing had to drop the case. "Sudden infant death syndrome," they're saying, only because they can't trace it to anything else, he said, hushed, to a police officer handy. The family, however, was so desperate through the situation, and Alex had a completely worthless bundle of emotions. He was not afraid to cry around the children, and that had made them uncomfortable, but also a little scared. To see their father on the edge and depressed had made them feel so small and uneasy. They just wanted their family back, and little else was going to make a difference. They looked toward Betty Ann as a pillar of utmost support. She had been so strong through all of this, she barely even had the time to shed a tear. The last icicle stood hanging underneath the roof of the stoop. The finest of mists ushered in the spring as drip by drip it was carried away. So, too, began the chorus of spring. The death of little Cassandra happened only months ago, but in the house of Betty Ann, it was a distant memory, whispered at best. The family moved on, and the tragedy, once howling, became more of a whimper. Everyone had accepted that the pitter-patter of little feet, all dressed in her little onesie and looking like pure white cottontail, was never going to walk down a staircase again. The thought of her memory was unspoken, but still there. She had become a ghost. Carson had signed up for spring baseball. Carrie was learning how to sew. Alex had gotten a promotion. So many new and exciting changes were happening that it had become difficult to be sad all the time. Betty Ann believed that idle hands are the devil's playground, so she took great interest when anything new peeked its head around the corner. She engrossed herself in packing lunches, joining the PTA, always having fresh baked cookies around. She joined the Rose Club in her neighborhood and always helped her neighbors wherever she could. Things had quickly settled down, and nobody seemed to be looking back. So you can imagine the shock all over again 3 months later when something absolutely terrible happened. On the way home from school, two well-known bullies came across the face-down floating body of Carson Harrison on their frequent walk home from school. It was over by the bullfrog pond in which Carson spent a lot of time catching tadpoles and studying amphibians. It looked as though he had been flailing his arms and legs madly in the water. The water was muddy, and the watershed over by the lowly waterfall from the drainage pipe had been disturbed by the waves. His little red hat floated miserably by the body, a silent witness. Once again, Detective Lansing was on the scene, surveying the area as a crime scene. He paid special attention to the two boys who found the body, eyeing them with a healthy dose of scrutiny and disbelief. "We just found him that way," the crying boys admitted through their salty tears. "We didn't do it," the other one cried in exasperation. "Call their moms. "This might be a long one," he half sighed and half grumbled, and in the corner of his mouth it began to twitch. "Look, get them into the station. We will order some pizza and grab a few grape sodas. I'm going to hate to let the Harrison family know about this. See if you can find out more about their relationship to Carson. Start with the teachers." After that evening, Detective Lansing decided that he wanted to figure out more about Betty Ann Hendricks. He did a little background check and started asking the neighbors some questions. But I had been home most of the day. I'd gone to Walgreens to pick up a prescription for Carrie. Bought some candy at the cash register, too. Some Starburst, tropical. I came home, did laundry. Do you know what a job doing laundry is for 4 people, Mr. Lansing? She looked very believably confused, but more importantly, at her own bad luck. Lansing told a cohort that evening that Betty Ann is either the unluckiest woman in the world or this is intentional. And so he did some deep digging under her fingernails, literally, a skin cell scratch sample, full DNA, all of her clothing taken from the day, including her soapy dish gloves and her kitchen towels. But there hadn't been any evidence to tie her to the murder. So while he would bide his time for more tests, viewing of neighborhood security footage, traffic cams, whatever he could get a hold of, she was innocent until proven guilty. And the smell of pumpkin spice held in the air just a little longer than it would in any other season. Great globes of orange gourds popped around the neighborhoods, and if you were careful, you might even see a few glowing at night. As the harvest leaves fell dryly in a swirl kicked up by errant chill gust, so too did the suspicions of Betty Ann. A woman on the end of the street had sworn she saw Betty dressed up in a red gown like Carrie, blood and all. But she wouldn't admit to her 4th glass of Pinot Noir, either. A gas station attendant thought he had seen her in her car, bawling profusely, but Betty Ann drives a white car, not a blue one. And even the head of the PTA saw Betty at the butcher's with another man. Too bad it was her nutritionist. So while the town may have had it in for Betty, she never had it out for any of them. While the constant toil of hardship swirled around her, it hadn't stung just yet. It nibbled and it sought the tenderness of flesh, but it did not bite. But what bitterness the autumnal season did have, it brought down quickly. Cassie was missing. There hadn't been a key or a clue, nor even any notice. On one especially cold October morning, just as the morning in the Hendricks house appeared to be letting up, she was gone. Detective Lansing searched high and low for anything he could find, but there simply weren't any clues to be had. Cassie was 17, and she had her own bank account, but it hadn't been touched. No extra clothes had been taken, and her old car sat along the sidewalk edge, cold as a withered old heart. There weren't any fingerprints. There was nothing in her behavior to indicate a new change or an old resentment. She was just gone. Betty Ann felt pressure on her now, and so did Alex. "Does someone have something out for us?" they asked to themselves. They stewed with anxiety every day, thinking she might come back. So it hit them. All 3 of their children were gone now. All the laughter had drained and emptied out of the house. But still, not all the love went with it. Betty Ann was tough in the face of adversity, and she still spoiled her husband harder than ever before. She used her domestic capabilities to enthrall him and give him more love without being possible, and she did it with genuine affection, without being too syrupy or clingy. Without Betty Ann, Alex would have been torn apart, maybe even dead. So perhaps she had even saved his life. "I'm going to make you something special tonight. I have a recipe for bolognese that's going to knock your socks off." And so she went to it, with all that hidden secret emotion we humans are capable of, but never able to put into words. Crisp, white table linen, sourdough started as she kept for years above the fridge, crusty bread, not cushy, the finer Pinot Gris, whole milk fresh from Motel's farm, and a blend of pork and sirloin ground up. homegrown garlic plated. All of these individual jewels led up to her finest and most secret ingredient. It was a white tin box she kept in her kitchen on the tallest shelf of her spice cabinet, an old metal Band-Aid box she had transformed into a spice shaker. The box had a masking tape label on the front. She dashed a few healthy dashes of the white powder into the spice box. The masking tape said, "Love," on the bottle, and the food would do the rest. By Mark Pavlicek. Thank you so much, Mark. I love the story. If you guys would, please leave your comments below. Let's show our appreciation to Mark for submitting this. Thank you for coming, and good night.